studied. It does not support or oppose candidates, factions, or political parties. League members as individuals are urged to work in the political party of their choice. In order to protect the League's nonpartisanship policy, guidelines regarding the political activities of the board of directors are reviewed frequently. And we also have a diversity statement. The League of Women Voters of Pullman is fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and practice. These concepts are central to our current and future success in engaging all individuals, households, communities, and policymakers in creating a more perfect democracy. We acknowledge and honor the first people of the Palouse region and their descendants, including our neighbors, the Nez Perce, Colville, and Coeur d'Alene tribes. Okay, so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Points. Brian is president of Points Consulting in Moscow. He is both a management consultant and an economist, and he will present the Palouse Regional Housing Study, which was published in September of 2019. And this study includes both Whitman and Latah counties. Okay, welcome, Brian. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Libby. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Okay, everything look good on your end?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, great. Well, thanks everybody for the invite. We finished this study, roughly 2 years ago, and there's been a lot of things that have happened since that time, obviously, and housing has been affected by it. So I'm mostly going to be talking about the material that we produced at that time, but where appropriate, I can mention some of the more recent trends and activities that I've noticed as well. And before we start, I want to acknowledge a couple of other parties that were really important to this. The study was actually completed by Thomas P. Miller and Associates of Indianapolis, of which I am a former employee. At the time the study was conducted, I was a director of research, and I happened to live in Moscow because it's a great place to live. But the company and the support staff that was working with me was located in Indianapolis. I think it was in the last 2 months of the study, I left the company and started my own company, which is Points Consulting, and just agreed with TPMA from there that, any further discussions, engagements, I'll do those and make sure I give credit to TPMA for their role in the process too. Partnership for Economic Prosperity is Latah County's economic development organization. Gina Terusio, who I'm sure many of you know, is the president. And she was kind of my my partner on the project in a sense. She was a client, but she was also a partner. And that when we conducted town halls, she was there with me collecting feedback. She joined me on some of the interviews with stakeholders. She helped me navigate situations when it came to communicating back with the cities and the counties and all that kind of stuff. So it was an unbiased third-party report, but PEP played an important role in enabling us to get that work done. And they still continue to play an important role in what's going on with this. So before I advance into the slides, I do want to say that you'll see one of the recommendations we put forward was to form a regional housing leadership committee. And it took a while to, I think largely due to COVID, to get that thing organized. But Gina has taken that on to find those people, to bring them onto the committee, to set the agenda. I'm not a member of the committee, though I get the emails still, just because I have an interest in keeping track of what they come up with. I'm sure Bobby can give more information on that because she's a member of the committee as well. But there's roughly 10 people that what our recommendation as a consulting organization is that you, just like the study did, you need representation from both counties. You need representation from both rural and urban. You need representation from nonprofits, for-profits, and the government sector. And I think they've done a good job of achieving all of those things with the balance of people that have been invited to it. So it's positive to see that committee's been formed. I know they're starting to work on developing some ideas and initiatives related to that. Do you want to say anything more about that, Bobby?
No, just that I've learned quite a lot, and it's been really interesting. And the basis for our organization was this study. And there's developers on the committee, there are community members on the committee, there are Jeff Guyette from the CAC, WSU representation. It's really, really quite good. Planners, developers, it's interesting.
All the people that need to be talking and working on those issues together.
And Gina does a great job, I will say that.
Good. Well, I kind of addressed this already, but it's something that comes up. It's like, who's Points Consulting? How does that relate to the other thing? Well, there you go. Now you get the story. I'm on my own, but I stand behind everything that happened with this study and all the material we came up with. And it wasn't just me. You know, there was a group of probably 8 of us who were working on the study back at the home office, including Mike Higbee was kind of the senior level person involved, and he has a background as a community and real estate developer, having done a lot of projects in Indiana over the years. So his insight was really instrumental. So first, briefly, just want to talk about what we actually did. I know some of you have embarked on reading the study. I know it's a lot to digest, so I do appreciate your time and effort and going into that. What I tried to do is put our kind of key recommendations and key points early on in the study, recognizing that not everybody's going to read every page. So if you've made a dent in it, you can be confident you've already gotten some of the key content. But the process we followed was listed here. You know, when you're ever doing a study like this, you need all sides of the story. As the analogy I like to use is that you can, if you just look at the socioeconomic data, but you don't talk to any of the people who are in that community and get to know what their issues are at the ground level, that's like looking at a box score in a paper rather than actually watching the game that happened. You can get a lot of information from a box score, but it's not the same experience. So we tried to blend both of those approaches together by looking at housing data, economic data, obviously income data, housing burden data. I'll show you some of the slides on that here in a minute. And then engaging with stakeholders as well and doing best practices before we come up with our final recommendations. Here's a bit more of a graphic presentation of what that process looks like, but you get the sense that I can't remember how many people we talked to exactly. I want to say it was somewhere in the order of 30, maybe just short of 30, but we got a broad audience of builders, employers, local government, nonprofits. And then I also mentioned we did a few kind of community town hall events. So we got a few more folks participating through that as well. The best attended one was in Colfax. I remember that at the Colfax Library, and there was really good turnout of maybe just shy of 20 people. So you blend the stakeholder engagement with your research and your best practices, and that's what leads to the recommendations that you finally saw. Another question, this came about from actually one of the city council members in Moscow, who was particularly interested in what are, like, sure, this could be, maybe this is an interesting intellectual exercise, but what are we going to get out of it? Why would you bother doing a study like this when we all already know that it's an issue? So we put this slide deck together to show that when you do a good job of a process like this, there's fairly good evidence that oftentimes it leads to some making a dent towards those problems in the near future afterwards. So you see some of these examples here. Sometimes those, I gotta keep moving this picture thing around so I can see the slides and see you all at the same time. In some cases, you get some grant funding from a government organization, whether that's state or federal. I will say you all representing Whitman County probably have better odds of getting grant funding than does the contingent in Latah County, just because of the structure of the state. And also, the state of Washington has been particularly aggressive on the issue of attainable housing and has a lot of programs and methods to receive funding related to that. So Anyway, sometimes it's a government grant that goes towards a specific project, and sometimes it's a private sector developer who said, hey, I didn't realize that this was, I had a hunch maybe, but I didn't have enough evidence to go off of, and they could use the study as partly as kind of the due diligence and market research for them to get the loan to do the project that they want to do. So lots of good examples of that happening in the past. As I suppose a good time as any to mention some of the things that I've heard and what have been happening since the study was completed. For one thing, Nils Peterson, who I'm sure some of you all know with the Moscow Affordable Housing Trust, has continued to develop his properties, and the recent project he has going on the south side of Moscow, I think there's going to be 16 units in that. So his model, the housing trust model, is something that we really looked favorably upon. Nils does a great job, and it's also just a great model. Like, you see good examples of that elsewhere in Washington and throughout the Pacific Northwest. So he's been continuing to make progress towards that. I'm not aware of any, I could be wrong, or maybe I just haven't heard. I haven't heard of any affordable projects, new projects that have been authorized or funded since the study was completed. What I have heard quite a bit of is real estate developers going after higher density type of stuff. There's a developer working on a project in Pullman up on Malawi Road, Kamiak Cottages, that he's doing his best. I mean, this is the challenge. This is always the challenge with people working in that industry, is even if they want to develop something that's affordable, the cost curves are really working against them. So he's doing everything in his power to keep the price levels maintained at an attainable rate. But just the fact that the plots are smaller and he's going through the planned unit development process and all of those kinds of things just help get that, help trim those costs down a little bit. There's talk, I don't know how public it is, so I can't say a whole lot about it, but there's talk of a fairly substantial 100-acre development in Moscow, again, near that south side of town. And the people working on that, they're not aiming specifically for, to provide attainable or affordable housing per se, but they are interested in providing a blend of affordabilities within the development, and perhaps even, kind of intermixing the size and the cost of the houses within the same street and that kind of thing. So, so those are some of the things that I've heard about. Perhaps some of, I don't know, I'll ask you all, have you heard about other things that are going on that I should know about as well? Or do you have any questions about any of those things?
I am not seeing any questions pop up on chat.
Yeah, well, it also, I'll note on that point too, if you do have questions, Bobby, should we just ask people to send them in via chat, and then you can kind of curate, and I can,
or they can hop in. Okay. It's fine. Right. They can do it both ways.
Yeah. So you are welcome. If it strikes you at that moment, just jump right in and ask me the question. There's also this gets to the point of the difficulty of this kind of process in general. A lot of times, improving the situation is with small kind of incremental improvements. So, when you see this happened in Moscow in 2020, I believe, there was a change in our local city ordinance that allowed people to stay in RVs for a period of longer than 3 months in one place at a time. Okay, you're looking at that, it's like, well, like that's like so almost insignificant. Like, why even bring it up? It's because that's the way these things go, and it's not just that's one thing that for people who are very low on the income stream and who have who maybe have a job in Moscow or they want to move to Moscow but they can't find any place to live that's affordable. It's a way that they can live in the community. But you see similar things if you just make small adjustments to the code related to how many unrelated individuals can live in a home within a given zone. what are, you change the setbacks by a couple of feet so you can get a little bit more density into a given parcel. You make it so you can build duplexes in a zone where previously you couldn't build duplexes. You make it so you could build quadplexes in a zone where you could previously only build triplexes, right? So those things don't always even make the news. It's the little things that all of our county commissioners and city council are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. When we do a study like this, it helps them understand that context, and that those marginal changes make for, in the long run, could make for bigger changes. Okay, I'll just keep on going unless you all want to, again, just stop and ask me questions at any point. So there's a lot of data in the report, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time really digging into it, but I think I have 2 or 3 slides that I felt like were some of the more interesting metrics. This one has to do with the renter population, and this is for again, both Whitman County and Latah County, and we're looking at it over this period of time. And we're looking at people who are owner occupying versus renter occupying, and also differentiating by age, which is important because I think a lot of people say, well, we have a ton of renters because of the colleges. True, that is true. But what this slide shows is that actually isn't changing that much. If you look at the gold bar and the pink bar, the people who are owner occupying and renter occupying their households, who are in that college age range of 15 to 24 years, not shifting that much over time. Where the shift is happening is people who are 25 years and older. I don't pick the numbers, but that's what the government says it is an adult, quote unquote. Maybe some of you who have older children older than 25 may quibble with the fact of whether that classifies as an adult. But that's the rules. But it's interesting to see that trend line, right? Where the biggest increase is in that turquoise colored bar, which is householders 25 years and older who are renter occupying. And for those who are since 2007, those who are of that age bracket, there's been an increase of about 7% who have become homeowners, 7-fold increase of equivalent to 46% of those who are home renters. So a pretty dramatic change in the composition of renters versus owners on the Palouse. And this held, I did a slide at one point that showed the two cities and then the county areas that outlie the cities. You can't do every individual city. The data just doesn't allow for it. But the trends are kind of holding consistent, which I think is just evidence of this issue of increasing costs and unattainability of housing. Some people also questioned at the time of the study, well, maybe people just want that, or do people just want to be renters more so than they did in the past, which is a legitimate question. And the answer to that is some, but that can easily be overstated. By and large, the millennial audience, once they get to the age that they're, through college, they're more settled, maybe they have a spouse, maybe they have some kids. The normal pattern is people still see the equity value in owning a house versus renting a house. So there's been surveys done at the national level by Gallup and that type of thing, where they ask people,
get in your bed, get in your bed, get in your bed.
That.
I have a question about this that goes to this slide, and that is, have you seen any data, or are you aware of data that affects voting patterns on property tax measures, such as the one that's coming up to expand the hospital district, related to the difference in home renters versus home owners, where the increased taxes are passed on to the renters through their lease and rental agreements when property taxes increase. And participation and fundraising in related to those measures being financed and just in general participation.
Okay. So I can't get too specific on that because I haven't really ever researched those things, but just what I can say of my knowledge of those topics in general is that frequently people who are property owners are opposed to increased taxation, all else being equal. Okay, if something that's like they really think is necessary and needed in the community, then that's a different story. But if you're just talking about what's their kind of more principled stance.
Yeah, they're long-term. Many of them are not necessarily located in the community that would benefit from that.
Fair, right. That's also a fair point. I don't know if there's any data that I'm aware of that shows location of homeowners.
Okay, thank you.
At least nothing proprietary. But there's also like that stuff that ultimately does get passed down. Lease laws are different in each state, but in Idaho, for example, you can't increase the cost of your rental unit unless you have a 90 plus days notice, and it's probably higher in Washington. So it doesn't happen immediately, but it does eventually get passed. Okay, so we've seen this increased trend towards renters. I was saying is the survey data. What does that tell us? That most people in the millennial age group, when asked, do you want to be a homeowner or do you want to be a renter? They said, I want to be a homeowner. What's holding me back is, student loans, don't have enough income, don't have enough, track record or credit history or, those types of issues. So.
This is Amy Honeywell. Can I ask something?
Yeah.
So, I'm a realtor and I have been since 2013 here in Whitman County. So your data here, I know it takes a while to get this data. So yours here ends at 2015. I think it will drastically increase on your household 25 and over renter occupied, as that even in the past 2.5, 3 years, that median price of our entry-level homes, at least in Pullman, has gone from basically the lower 200s and now we're almost 300,000. So those people are being priced out. So what I'm going to be really curious about is this next group of data that you get in the last 5 years of this decade.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amy. That's a good point. I do think it'll increase, but how drastically is a question to me, because as I have a slide on this later, but the COVID reshuffle migration thing that's occurred over this past 12 months has also caused some changes too. And I think what we're seeing is that the people who have the ability to move to an area like this typically tend to be of more means, and they're tending to build their own houses, right? So it's a question of how much of the increase has been higher income people versus the increase of the typical level we have. So good point on that. Yeah, and the data just I can't remember this. I think this was American Community Survey from Census. It takes a while to register. Housing affordability, it probably seems like there's a lot to look at here, but it's not as complicated as it seems. The basic differentiation between the one on the top and the one on the bottom is whether people are owners and or renters. Okay, so owners top, renters bottom. Then you're looking at their income levels, and then you're looking at the number of people in the household in terms of thousands. Okay, so what's the basic story here? And then, sorry, one more layer to that is the percentage of their household income that is going towards housing. So that includes rent, utilities, mortgage, all of the basic stuff. If it comes into play, HOA fees, but it's not, none of the other things that would, you know, like some people will trade transportation cost in order to get a lower housing cost. It doesn't account for any of that kind of stuff. Okay, so the basic story is people who are owners tend not to be cost burdened. Cost burden is determined by two brackets. There's people who pay 20 to 29% of their income towards housing, and then people who pay 30+% of their income towards housing. Not generally a huge issue for households earning over $75,000 a year. The biggest pain point here is for the renters who are earning less than $20,000 a year, and you can see how much of their income is going towards housing cost. And then that kind of tapers down a little bit, but still an issue for the 20 to 35,000 group and the 35 to 50,000 group. And also interesting that even at the among owner-occupied individuals, that the $50,000 to $75,000 group, there's still a decent number of people who are housing cost burdened. So overall, 38% of the region's population is cost burdened. We took extra pains to look at this according to age, so that we knew it wasn't just students. Data indicate it's not. So, for example, 23% of those living in Whitman County, which most of the students are not living, are also cost burdened. 16% of those that are 50,000, 75,000. So anyway, it's a lot of it is driven by students, but it's not all students. If you want to, I think I remember the numbers. Might be off by a percentage point, but I think in Idaho it was 30. The overall total was 31%. I think in Washington it was 34%. So trending above both states in terms of cost burdened populations. So clearly a lot of different types of issues, and one could interpret that data in different ways to say what the potential solutions are to that. We also did a housing forecast, and what we came up with was over the next, keeping an eye on the clock so I don't talk too much. Over the next 10 years, we're forecasting a need. So this is going back to 2018 and 19. 3,200 additional housing units needed, of which the lion's share of demand is for actual what are traditionally called single family homes. So what do we mean by single family homes? Well, in real estate, the basic differentiation is between multifamily and single family. Again, I don't make the names. This is just what the real estate industry calls them. A single family home is usually detached from other units, and it's a house. It's typically owner occupied, right? That's the basic, what we basically think of as a standard neighborhood house. But they can be different sizes. You can have smaller ones. You can also have townhomes technically qualify as single family. So there's different ways to do that. Then there's multifamily, which is largely apartment complexes. Also, I believe it includes condos. Amy can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And mobile home parks and a few other things in that kind of general category. So what we've seen, I don't have a slide on this, but what we've seen is all of the production of supply has been for apartments on both sides of the border over the past 10-year period of time. And if I had the chart, it would look like this, just like little, boom, big one, little, boom, big one, like this. So there's these punctuated points, and 2017-18 was one of those points because we had the Evolve project and the, I can't remember the name of the other one, but you all know what I'm talking about. That company built student facilities in both Moscow and Pullman, and that just caused this huge bump in multifamily. But we haven't seen that kind of bump in single family for a long time. Those with the kind of the historical memory of the region we'll talk about, we did have kind of a big housing boom in the late 70s, early 80s, and it just hasn't happened since then. So you think of all the things that have happened since then, and the population growth that we've had, the fact that a lot of people really love the Palouse as a place to live. Even if they go to college here, then they'll, they want to get a job at a place like SEL and stay here. We get a lot of people who move here to come work for the universities or the hospitals or whatever the the case may be. But there hasn't that balance of supply and demand has, regardless of what people want, their options haven't been there. Again, in case you're the kind of person who has the money, that especially if you're coming from Western Washington or California, it's just like, well, I'll just build exactly the house that I want, and I'll go out to, you know, Albion or Troy, and I'll find some land, and that's what you're going to get. So that's the type of multifamily that we've typically seen, except for, you know, little pockets here and there. I think over time that those two categories will probably, I think we need another middle category there of just kind of middle density housing, because you can do tighter density neighborhoods that are detached, or you can do, you know, townhomes or twin homes that are, you know, still owner occupied, right? There's different ways to do that will help blend or reduce those costs. Okay, so here were some of the recommendations we came up with. Don't have time to go into all of them in detail. You see the top one there about developing the leadership team. Priority land set-asides. This, you know, different municipalities, states have different options for doing this. The idea being that if there's agreement among the political leadership that they want to see a certain type of housing development happen, you can go into more of a master planning type of process to say that this land is set aside specifically for this purpose. We don't have to follow, although we have all these zoning rules, they don't necessarily have to be followed here because we're trying to achieve a specific purpose. A lot of times that has to do with affordability. Clarity in development standards. I think that's a big one. You know, it's there are people in the world of real estate development who can pick up a municipal code book and look, you know, well, I need to go to this section and I can find out exactly what kind of the bulk density standards are and that kind of thing. But most people don't know that. People who own their own homes don't really know what rules they have to follow or even what zoning district they're in. So anything that can be done to make that more understandable and more simple for people to understand is a good step. There are examples of some communities who have done really good jobs of that, developed these really nice kind of visual presentations of, you know, like an aerial view of here's what a lot looks like and here's where you can put the lines and that kind of thing. So one of the housing types that we explored and recommended further investigation into is accessory dwelling units, which is the ability to put an additional unit on an existing parcel. So that helps solve the problem of the cost of infrastructure development, right? If you're putting something in a city where a parcel already exists, then you don't have to build a lot of new pipes, you don't have to build a lot of new sidewalks, right? It's all kind of already there. Well, accessory dwelling units are allowed, but people don't necessarily know what they can do. Like, you know, what rules they need to follow, what kind of parking they need to make available. So if you work on those kinds of things, like making it simpler for people to understand, you can start to see progress on that. I was at a presentation in Boise just before the pandemic, and I was a planning director from, I believe, I can't remember the city of Boise or the city of Nampa, but regardless, he talked about how, okay, we made these adjustments to our ADU allowances and we made it really clear, we made flyers and all this kind of stuff. And they did it, you know, 5-6 years ago. They saw almost no new units developed right off the bat. But after a 5-6 year period of time, we're talking about hundreds of units that were starting to be developed just because it was clear what they could do. So the land trust model is another one that I mentioned and what Nils is doing. Don't have anything like that on the Whitman County side, but it's a terrific model. For those not familiar with it, the idea being that you, in traditional single family home ownership, you own the building and you own the land underneath the building. So there's a lot of extra costs that come with land, especially now, especially in the Palouse, the value of agriculture and all that stuff. So what the land trust model does is say the trust itself holds on to the land underneath the building, and the homeowner owns the improvements or the thing that sits on top of the building. So they still get the benefits of a home ownership type of model, including the appreciation of equity that comes with that, but they don't have to have the full burden of having to pay for the land in addition to the building. So there's a few of the ideas that we really recommended. Here's some of the types of homes that we said, aren't either. You see some of it, but it's not happening at the rate that it should to satisfy the demands of people who live here and people who are moving here. Some of them are surely things that you all have heard of, and then some others are probably a little more out of the box, including the agri-hood concept, which we haven't seen any movement on, but I'm hopeful that could happen in the future. Modular built homes is another big opportunity, right? So one of the biggest issues we have here is just the lack of the skilled labor necessary to build the buildings. If you're doing modular, and especially if you're doing it at scale, you can have a building built in a factory somewhere, and then it gets transported and it gets put on top of the foundation. So in places where the cost, not necessarily a whole lot cheaper unless you're doing it at scale. But even if you're not bringing the costs down, you're still providing another opportunity for people to get a home that where lack of labor might be an issue. Here's just a few examples here. Here's one of the examples. I think this is from somewhere in Indiana. These nice little pictures of here's what a lot area looks like. Here's what the front setbacks should look like.
Can I ask a question before we get into this level of detail? I don't know if Brandon Chapman is still on the call. He's one of our city council members, but I thought there was something working its way through the Pullman City Council to create an area where these smaller single homes could be built on smaller lots. That's one of the details in the kind of the end of your report. Small single homes, less than 1,800 square feet, 8 to 20 homes per acre with limited parking and storage. I thought that, have you heard, Brandon, are you still with us?
Hey, Libby, it's actually me, Sarah, that's here today, and Brandon's out doing some other things, and I don't have that answer. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, anyway, I was pretty excited because it seemed like in terms of anyway, the comprehensive plan, we focus on, the density, the student housing, and then we focus on people who want a home that's 3,000 square feet on a big lot. But we need something in between, something that our city can get behind. And I really like this idea of small single family homes on smaller lots with less amenities, not a huge garage, not a big storage facility, but just smaller homes. And that's what I'm excited about. But I thought I heard that Pullman was considering changing some zoning.
Libby?
Yes.
Carl here. I believe that some of those first units are going in a little subdivision called something Court that's just above the new Kamiak School.
Yeah,
I was up there the other day, and I know that was planned, and I noticed that several of the foundations are in, and they're very small. They were originally termed tiny houses even, but they are definitely separate foundations. And then the new development downhill from Kamiak and to the west, I would believe, that's currently being, public hearings or whatever, it's been given a due pass. Those homes are going to be 1,200 to 1,800 square feet that are going in there, and I think it's 50 units.
Okay, good. Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, I've heard about at least that first development, and I'm not aware of anything that City Council is working on to make further adjustments. But what I will say is that what you see sometimes in other communities is when somebody takes that first stab at doing a planned unit development like that, or in Moscow we call it a PRD, and Pullman they call it a PUD. But basically you partner with the city to say, here's what this place is going to look like. It's not going to follow your typical rules, but we're going to make sure we're addressing all the concerns of fire and emergency access and all that kind of stuff, but allowing people to live tighter, higher density. You see that piloted with one community, and it works. It leads to a greater acceptance and awareness, not just on behalf of the city and county powers that make those decisions, but also the community itself. people may be like, well, I could never imagine living in a, you know, place that's 900 square feet. But then I looked at that house and I thought, oh, actually, you know, if you have all this other stuff outside, maybe I don't need as much room inside, right? So hopefully we're starting to see some of that stuff happening locally. I won't go over this one. It's just, I mentioned we have a program like this in Moscow. Here's another great example in a very rural area in northwestern Washington, that they're doing a great job of developing a similar program of a land trust. So I'll go over this slide, and then I want to give some more time for Q&A. But what about COVID? What is that doing to our current circumstances? Here's just a few of the things that I've seen and noted over this period of time. The increased in-migration is a real thing that's going on, and we're not actually going to know how big it is, I think, until the next census numbers come out. But one statistic that I saw from a reputable source was saying that I think it was 0.7 or 0.8% of the US's population made a permanent migration due to COVID within the first 6 months of you know, all of the COVID stuff that was going on. So that is a massive number of people. It really is. Some people just move across town, and other people just use it as an opportunity to go somewhere completely different. Obviously, with the natural, you know, the space, the natural amenities, all the things that we have here, it's drawing a lot of people to the area. That's probably no secret to you all, but you know, we're seeing more people come, especially from Western Washington. But you know, I've heard of people coming from Vermont and Ohio and Arkansas here as well, and they just, you know, they hear about this place and it's like, well, that sounds like a dream come true. So that's happening, and they're not generally living within city boundaries. What they're generally doing is moving out into the hinterlands. Sometimes they're living in some of the outlying cities. I think we're seeing significant growth in places like Colfax, Troy, Potlatch, you know, any of them, all of them. I think that they're all growing. Maybe a shade more so on the Idaho side than on the Washington side. I think that the whatever one's beliefs on it, there are a lot of people trying to get away from the level of regulation that they see in some of these other states. So Idaho, you know, Moscow being on the border with Pullman, there are some people like, well, I could get all the benefits of, you know, working in Washington, but I could live on the Idaho side and, you know, have some of these other benefits. We're seeing a lot of that too. Broader level stuff, the stimulus package and the associated interest rate declarations. When those interest rates are held down, that's just going to increase more and more people to buy. When you're seeing inflation, which we likely will, that makes it just makes more sense to be a borrower than it does to be a lender in that kind of environment. So we're going to be seeing that effect for probably the next 10 years, I would estimate. So it's a period of time during which it's more economically beneficial, let's say, for people to buy homes than it has been in the past. But that said, when you're dealing in an area of limited supply and high demand, like we have in the Palouse, it's really mostly benefiting people who have money, and you know, many of them are buying multiple properties during that period of time to take advantage of all of those types of things. So it could just lead to speculation and not so much, you know, like filtering down to, you know, middle income and lower income individuals. If you see enough production of supply, then you start to see it having an effect across the board, right? So it's just, you know, simply you're not getting enough houses built, they're going to be snatched. This is what we're seeing, right? It's just going to be snatched up by the people who have the most money to spend. And that's a risk. I don't think it's a huge risk, but there is a chance for over speculation in hot markets. I think we're in a hot market right now. A hot market, I mean, specifically on the Palouse. So it could get to the point where people are overspending and then eventually they get burned, right? Because, you know, it turns out that the homes aren't worth as much as what they thought they were, and they can't find those buyers on the back end when they want to turn it over the next time. But that hasn't really ever happened on the Palouse, to be honest. What we did see during the Great Recession was a mild decrease in home value in on the Whitman County side, and almost no change in home value on the Latah County side. So, different recession, different characteristics going on, but the way that our economy functions being very historically insulated because of the university money, we don't deal with big swings, and I don't expect that to change overnight. I will say though that I think with the kind of the further growth and diversification of our industry base, that we're becoming slightly more susceptible to that kind of speculation and that kind of swing. And at the same time, the University of Idaho not doing so well financially or in terms of their enrollment. Here, me as a resident of Latah County, that's been our calling card, for 50 years, and that's starting to shift. Now I think Moscow is becoming more driven by private employers, by the MZs, the Gripmans, the SELs than it has been in the past. So we are becoming more susceptible. Long story short, but I don't think we're going to get to the point where we're a Boise or a Denver or something where there's the real chance that people are just spending crazy, stupid money that they're going to end up, losing their shirt on. Not in the short term anyway. So those are some of the things that I see, and I'll just open it up to questions in general.
So I have a question, Brian. What this migration that you're talking about to this area, what might this mean for like rural Whitman County, where we're seeing, these rural little Ticos and Rosalias and these little communities, these farming communities that have just been dying on the vine. They can't keep a grocery store there.
Right. Yeah. So it could be a really good thing. It could, but it's going to create some issues to address at the same time, because a lot of times people are coming without, they don't work because they're retired, or the work that they do have is completely associated somewhere else. Right. So they're not necessarily, they may be bringing some money with them, but they're not necessarily bringing like high levels of employment. Right. So then you have the risk of further like gentrification and, further stratification of the income levels, basically. You also, a lot of these smaller towns have major infrastructure issues of like, their sewer systems are very aged and can't handle, another, 10 homes being brought online. So it's going to create the need for some of those communities to have to find some way to connect those dots and fix those types of problems.
This is Amy Honeywell again. I have a question about if there is an example you could give of a similar situation to a college town. Maybe it's a bigger population though, where a community for affordable housing has been done well. So that it would serve as an example for me to go look into.
Good question, Amy. Sorry, I can't think of something right now.
Okay.
I'm running through college towns and trying to match it up with like the list of places that have done.
And you mentioned Indiana, of those little homes that.
Right. Yeah.
On that diagram.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll have to look up what city that was in, or it's in the report actually. So
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sure there is a good example, but sorry, I just can't.
And I can do some searching too. I just thought. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And so I have another question. Why is housing like in the Midwest, like Michigan and places like that, why is it so inexpensive compared to out here?
Yeah. So I'd say two reasons. One is they have a lot of historic buildings that can just kind of be turned over. And you see this when you're, I lived in Indianapolis for a year and a half, and it was just like you could see where the bouncing ball was moving. Like, okay, this neighborhood got, repaired. This neighborhood got repaired. And some people will say, well, it's gentrification, but I don't think it's that simple. I think you see a lot of cases where the people who are living there experience the benefit of all of their all the neighboring houses, like getting better, right? And if they're able to stay there, they ride that wave of the equity appreciation. So when you have a lot more historic housing stock, it takes a lot for a house to get so bad that it has to get torn down. There's almost always somebody out there who's willing to repair it. So they have more stock to start with, and a lot of their stock was built during a time where we didn't have the same level of requirements for builders to provide they didn't have to follow all the same regulation. Okay, that's part of it, and they didn't have to provide all the same infrastructure. So you can see this when you're walking around our cities now. If there's a neighborhood that doesn't have any sidewalks, right? Well, that's weird. Well, it's like, okay, well, that was built like in the 70s before that was a requirement. All those things add cost. And, we can say they're important for community development, but they do add cost for the builders. And if you have a lot of things that were built prior to that period, and again, you're just kind of recycling through it, that gives you the ability to keep those costs a lot lower.
Right.
I think that's part of it. And then there's also most places, this isn't exclusively true, most places in the Midwest are not experiencing population increase nearly to the same extent we are. So they can just kind of, again, recycle rather than having to, they're not chasing that population growth curve in the same way we are.
This is Kat. I was gonna say, I noticed with Texas with their current storm, it also seemed like they don't have to do quite the insulation and a lot of those building things that probably keep costs down a lot as well.
Right. Fair point. Yeah, that's true.
My question, and maybe you've alluded to it, but obviously the developers that have been active lately in Pullman are looking at different sets of demographics and growth potential. Let's just say that there is than I read about, which heavily emphasizes more online learning and less in-place learning, which was accelerated by the pandemic, and the lowered birth rate, so that there are, even the public schools are planning on less influx and increase. We've about built, the school district is about built to handle their projected growth in students, primary and secondary, not college age student growth over the next 10, 20 years at least. We're a little bit over capacity, along with the addition that's going on at Lincoln Middle School. The plan, which I was on the board then, that we developed about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, is near completion. And so what we have is these student complexes that are being built. They're rentals. They're not going to be converted in the next 15 or 20 years to single occupancy homes that people own individually. Their amenities of pools and so on, and even their own transportation system, is based on full occupancy or nearly that. And we're going to have, I predict, we're going to have a housing glut of 4 and 5 bedroom homes that are not going to fit with families and aren't going to be available and are not going to be rentable by a family with 2 children or something. So that the conversion of these student housing, targeted housing complexes to a more diversified tax base, industrial base that you mentioned, is going to be not easily convertible to a different employment base, such as increases in institutions like Schweitzer and so on, which is we have to get 6 people together in order to rent this place and afford $3,000 a month in rentals, or the lease costs. So I think that that's going to be a real dilemma for the city of Pullman over the next 20 to 25 years, and wonder about pre-planning for that transition.
That's a really good question, Carl. I think so. There's some things that are unknown to me too on that front, but I think that when you're talking about facilities like Evolve, the downside is they are not flexible for use. So there is a chance that they could suffer some vacancy and cause some problems for the community. I don't know about that. I don't know. Are we dealing? I want to think more about that. Are we dealing with a really permanent long-term shift in how people learn and where they live and that kind of stuff?
I don't know about school buses, but I know that the one that's currently fully occupied is operating its own shuttle transportation system, because it wasn't designed for the transit coaches to turn around. I don't know about school buses.
Yeah. So then I think there's other types of housing though that is much more flexible. So for example, I've talked to property managers in Pullman in the middle of, or leading into the fall of 2020. They said, I'm as busy as ever, because they own single family rentals and duplexes and stuff like that. So they're getting students who couldn't live on campus. And they're also in the same time getting all these families that we've been talking about who are renters.
Right. Well, I know it's time for the session to end. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, actually, it is time for us to end. We do try to stay on time with our sessions. I want to think, because people have to go to work and so forth, and I notice our numbers are going down as it is. So I just want to thank you, Brian, for really giving us some great insights into what's going on, because it does just, I feel like we're kind of sometimes scratching our heads going, what's going on here? Why does it feel like things are blowing up? And it's a hard question to answer. So, yeah, I want to thank you.
Well, thank you for your time as well. I'm happy if anybody has questions, you can feel free to email me as well.
Libby, do you have anything to add?
No, I just wondered how in the world Brian was going to get through the 100 pages of that report, but you did a masterful job getting the high points. But there's so much to learn in there. Like I didn't realize that the average, let me see. I have to, just a second. It seemed like Latah County is a wealthier county than Whitman, according to some of the statistics that were reported, and that Moscow was wealthier than Pullman. Was that the average house price, or what was it that I was looking at?
I know it wasn't the income levels, but it might have been home values. I can't exactly remember though. Yeah, I mean, that's something we see, Well,
no, it was income. It says Latah County, 41,738. Whitman County is 39,276. And then in Moscow, it's 34,500. Pullman is 29,500. So I think some of those numbers are skewed because our university is so much larger than the University of Idaho. But some of this is just because so many people want to live on Moscow Mountain and build great big homes, I think.
Yeah, true.
Well, this is supposed to be household income. I wrote it down here. Well, anyway, that was shocking to me. I always think that we're a little more affluent on this side of the state line, but apparently we're not.
All right. Well, we need to go. I think our session is over, and I just again thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure to hear you, and good luck with your business. If anybody has any additional questions, you have Brian's contact information, and he clearly is a wealth of knowledge. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.